This is the TotGuard 350 watt e-bike, which you're likely to see if you're looking at cheap e-bikes on Amazon. I've had mine for around 5 months and have put over 1,100 miles on it in that time. I've been using this bike for everything, running errands, including groceries, casual cruising, and lots of fast miles on local gravel trails. So let's get into it. Taking a look at the bike as a whole, I'll address an obvious modification first, the styling. As you've probably noticed if you're looking at this bike, the default paint job isn't the nicest to look at. I decided to add a little bit of flair and get it ready for Steve Wallace-style stealth camping adventures by putting a digital camo vinyl wrap on it. I did a pretty half-assed job applying this, as you can see, but it looks okay if you're standing far enough away. I'll address probably the biggest question first about e-bikes, or at least one I always have when I'm looking at e-bikes, is the range. This e-bike advertises a 20-mile range, and from my experience, that's pretty accurate. My longest ride so far has been 23 miles before the battery conked out on me, 2/3 of the way up the 400-foot elevation climb hill that I have at the very end of every ride I have. Range is obviously going to vary quite a bit by riding style, and the way I ride is with the bike on the maximum assist level, but pedaling the entire time to try and keep the speed up, and only using the throttle when I'm pulling away from intersections around cars to try and, get a move on. On a related note, I'll mention that charging the TotGuard e-bike takes around 5 to 6 hours when it's more or less fully depleted to get all the way back to fully charged. Let's move on to performance. The 350 watt hub motor in the TotGuard is far from the most powerful motor or the torquiest design, but as someone without any other e-bike experience, I've still had an absolute blast with it. I'm a big guy, probably quite a bit over the 250 pound recommended weight limit when I first got it, and on flat ground the throttle has always provided nice acceleration. Don't expect too much from the throttle on anything big enough to really call a hill, but it does make all but the biggest hills quite easy for even an unfit person. I'd been pretty darn sedentary since the pandemic started and quite unfit when I got this bike, but the only hill I had trouble with in my entire town when I first got it was the previously mentioned 400-foot elevation climb to the top of the hill that I live on. And that's 400 feet of elevation climb over about a quarter of a mile. So it's pretty steep and pretty long. It's a pretty challenging hill. And that was enough to overwhelm my legs plus the motor at first. But after about a month of riding, I was able to build up enough leg strength and a little bit of extra endurance to be able to ride all the way up the hill, and have now just been working on getting up faster and faster each time. The bike's different assist levels change the speed at which the assist cuts off. So as I mentioned, I keep it in the highest assist level, which cuts off at 20 miles an hour. And then I think the one down from that, it's either 16 or 12. I want to say it's 12, and then I believe the one below that is like 4 or 8. I almost never use the bottom one. The middle one, that's 12, I do use when I'm riding around pedestrians on trails. I'll pop it down to that middle assist level just so that I'm not zooming past at 20 miles an hour, which I know I wouldn't appreciate if I was out taking a walk. And I will bring up that, some nicer e-bikes, you wouldn't really have to change the assist level in that circumstance. But since this does just have a cadence sensor, anytime that you're pedaling, it's going to be pushing you toward that maximum speed level for the assist that you're on. So if you are in the maximum assist level and you want to slow down a little bit for some pedestrians, but you don't want to totally stop pedaling, the assist motor is going to sort of keep pushing you up towards 20 miles an hour. So you do kind of have to drop that down if you want to slow down without hitting the brakes. All right, I'm not really qualified to talk about drivetrains on the bike. I'm definitely a bike noob, but this is a 3x7 type, so you get 21 total speeds. One thing I will note is that the front shifter is a 7-speed shifter, even though there are only 3 gears, which at first, for like the first half hour I was riding this as a bike noob, totally confused me. I was like, what's going on? But it does just shift around where you would expect, on the ends and in the middle. So it works totally normally, but I found it a bit odd. One component that I will talk about a little bit more due to how much tinkering I've done on them is the brakes. So these are cable-operated disc brakes and have been probably the biggest issue I've had on the bike. Essentially what's going on is that I think the calipers aren't properly adjusted, so getting the cable tight enough to actually get the brakes to squeeze can lead to the arm of the brake over rotating, which has the undesired effect of causing the brake cable to completely lose tension and the brakes to totally stop working. Fortunately, there are front and rear brakes, so you've got some redundancy there, and this hasn't caused a really bad situation for me yet. But it's definitely not great, and something that's also probably is pretty easy to fix. But unlike adjusting the cable tension, and even getting the brakes aligned, there aren't a ton of great how-to guides on fixing this specific issue. So it's not something I've been able to dive into yet. But one day. So yeah, aside from that, when the brakes are sort of working as expected and not losing tension, they work pretty well. Although I will say that, as a bigger guy and as someone who has, the storage rack on the back and that has with the milk crate, and I enjoy using this for errands, hydraulic disc brakes are definitely high on my list of upgrades. All right, this bike does come with a suspension fork. So it's basically a very sort of standard looking hardtail mountain bike. And so, as I've mentioned throughout, I don't really have any bike experience, so I can't really compare it to other forks. But as a big guy who, as I mentioned as well, rides a lot on gravel and doesn't really slow down, I enjoy, keeping the pace up. It's done a pretty good job. It seems really sturdy. I don't really have any concerns that, it's not supporting, the weight, or that it's taking damage or getting, less sturdy. And you can definitely feel it doing dampening as well. So it definitely seems to work and get the job done. It doesn't have any adjustments beyond just on and off. And I have noticed it can be a little bit sticky at times, but that may be due more to my, lack of maintenance on it and not keeping it quite as clean as I should. But yeah, I can't really complain about the suspension fork. It seems to be working as advertised. All right, and then I do enjoy doing some night riding, so I will mention the headlight, which is adequate, I think is probably the best way to put it. It doesn't illuminate a super wide field of view, but it will get the road or path ahead of you pretty well illuminated. So you're not going to, hit a giant pothole or whatever, but you're also not going to be seeing a whole lot. So you're going to be really paying attention. It's a little bit of a thrilling experience riding at night. My last hardware note will be the saddle, which I don't currently have installed on it, but I'll just talk about it a little bit. The default saddle is reasonably comfortable. I used it for probably the first couple hundred miles I had the bike. And at first I thought it was actually felt great. I was like, wow, this is a really comfortable bike seat. But toward the end of rides, I definitely noticed, a lot of soreness. So I ended up grabbing a $40 seat off of Amazon after weighing a few different options. I went with the Medicus Air, the sort of the medium, the 17. They've got 3 different sizes. And I've enjoyed it a lot and am a lot more comfortable on longer rides. I pretty regularly ride about 15 miles. That's sort of my normal ride, occasionally pushing up to 20, 25. All right, so now I'll talk a little bit about my experience with the quality control and customer service aspect of this, because when I originally purchased the TotGuard, I did end up getting a defective battery. So I took it out on the first ride, about a 5-mile ride, got almost most of the way home, that big hill I mentioned, and it conked out on me. And so I had to push it up the hill, and I'm a lot fitter now than I was then, so I was really out of breath by the time I got home. And so that was kind of a negative experience. And then in terms of support, I had an issue where I had originally got the bike and I put it together in late winter, and I waited for spring, so I kind of got rid of all the packaging. So I didn't have any of TotGuard's contact information, so I ended up having, and I couldn't find any online. There's just no way to contact them, just searching online. So I had to start the review process or the return process through Amazon, who wanted to replace the entire bike, which I was just like, okay, if that's the only option, even though it seemed like a giant pain. And then while I was waiting on Amazon to sort of do that, I ended up writing a negative review. And then TotGuard did reach out to me and ended up replacing the battery. So I don't know, maybe it's my bad for throwing out the contact information, but I would have, when I got rid of the packaging, but I would have liked to have had some other way to, get the battery replaced on its own without having to write a negative review. But it did get fixed in the end, and I have a functioning e-bike that I've put over 1,100 miles on. So I can't complain too much, but there's definitely room for improvement in terms of, quality control, with the defective battery, and then the customer service experience of it being really tough to get a hold of someone, even though they did provide a good solution in the end. So that brings us to the end of this video, and despite the issues I've had with the brakes and the original battery issue, I have to say that this is probably one of the best purchases I've ever made. There are much more powerful e-bikes out there, but the 350 watt motor still makes a huge difference compared to a purely pedal powered bike. And the fact that this is a pretty standard, if cheap, hardtail also means that there's a world of upgrade possibilities. And even after 1,000 miles, the motor isn't showing any signs of wear. It sort of works exactly the same as it did on day one. So it is hard for me to fully recommend the TotGuard bike if you aren't willing to do a little bit of tinkering and you aren't fairly handy, just due to the issues I've had with the brakes. But other than that, I've got to say, I definitely feel like I've gotten my money's worth, probably more than my money's worth, especially factoring in, improved fitness and how much more time I spend just moving around outdoors. That improves, state of mind. If you don't mind the aspect that it's not perfect and you're going to have to do a little bit of tinkering, the TotGuard Ebike is pretty awesome, and I've had a great time with it. So let me know if you have any questions about this. I hope this was helpful, and thanks for watching.